Dust swirled across the barren Wyoming plains as Elijah Mason discovered her, a crumpled figure in torn finery at his ranch gate. Blood matted her golden hair, yet her grip on a weathered envelope remained unbroken. The mysterious woman had no name to give, but that letter, addressed to Franklin Hathaway, the territory's wealthiest banker, would upend everything. When delivered, the banker's face drained of color as decades of buried secrets threatened to surface. A fortune stolen, a family destroyed, and a town built on lies. What terrible truth could make the most powerful man in Redemption Falls tremble like a child? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elijah Mason wasn't one for company. 10 years since Appomattox, and still he preferred the company of his horses to that of men. The war had taken more than his youth. It had stolen his faith in humanity. He carried the unconscious woman with surprising gentleness for a man whose hands were calloused from years of ranch work. Her frame was light, delicate, a stark contrast to the rugged landscape surrounding his modest homestead. As he shouldered open the door to his cabin, the woman stirred, her eyelids fluttering without. "Opening? Easy now," he murmured, though he doubted she could hear him. The cabin was sparse but clean. A worn leather sofa faced a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area occupied one corner, and a narrow bed sat against the far wall. It was here that Elijah laid the mysterious woman, careful not to jostle her injuries. From beneath his bed, he pulled a worn leather medical pouch, a remnant of his days as a field medic in the 7th Wisconsin Infantry. The sight of it brought unwelcome memories, the screams of dying men, the stench of gangrene, the hopeless cases he couldn't save. His hands trembled slightly as he unfastened the tarnished buckle. "Not now," he muttered to himself. "She needs—" "You present." The woman's breathing came shallow but regular. Blood had congealed along her hairline, and a purple bruise bloomed across her left cheekbone. Her fine dress, once quality fabric, was torn and soiled, suggesting she'd traveled far in harsh conditions. Most peculiar was that envelope still, clutched in her right hand even while unconscious. Elijah worked methodically, cleaning her wounds with water boiled on his cook stove. As he dabbed at the gash on her forehead, he noticed the delicate lines of her face, too refined for a frontier woman. Her hands, though dirty, showed no signs of labor. A lady from back east, perhaps, though what business such a woman would have in Wyoming territory, he couldn't guess. The letter troubled him most. Franklin Hathaway was not a man to be trifled with. The banker owned half the businesses in Redemption Falls and held mortgages on most of the others, including Elijah's modest ranch. A cold, calculating man with political aspirations who'd built his fortune in the chaos following the war. "What mess have you brought to my door?" Elijah asked the unconscious woman, as if in response. She stirred, her eyes opening briefly. They were startlingly blue against her dirt-smudged face. "They'd stole it all," she whispered, grasping weakly at his sleeve. "Must reclaim what was stolen." "Who stole what?" Elijah asked, but her eyes had already closed again, her breathing evening out into the rhythm of sleep. Night fell, and with it came indecision. The woman needed a proper doctor. Marshall Green's wife had some medical training, but bringing her here meant questions Elijah couldn't answer. The letter weighed on his conscience, too. Whatever it contained had driven someone to harm this woman, yet delivering it might bring more trouble. He stoked the fire and settled into his chair, rifle across his lap. Sleep would be a luxury he couldn't afford tonight. Dawn broke with pale fingers of light stretching across the plains. Elijah had dozed fitfully, waking at each small sound. The woman had remained unconscious, though her color had improved somewhat. He checked her wounds, relieved to find no signs of infection. "I need to ride into town," he told her sleeping form. "That letter's burning a hole in my saddlebag." Her only response was steady breathing. Elijah prepared a simple breakfast, leaving water and bread within her reach should she wake. He scribbled a note explaining his absence, though he doubted she'd be coherent enough to read it. Outside, his stallion Midnight nickered in greeting. "At least you're happy to see me," Elijah muttered, patting the horse's muscular neck. As he saddled up, doubt gnawed at him. The sensible choice would be to wash his hands of this business, take the woman to town, drop her at the doctor's, and ride back to his solitude. Yet something in her desperate words haunted him. Reclaim what was stolen. How many men had returned from the war to find their lives, their futures stolen? How many never reclaimed what was rightfully theirs? Elijah checked his revolver, making sure it was loaded. Whatever this letter contained had already prompted violence. He'd be a fool to think delivering it wouldn't invite more. One good deed, he told himself as he mounted Midnight. Deliver the letter, fetch the doctor, and then, she's no longer your concern. But even as the words left his lips, Elijah knew it was a lie. The war had taught him to recognize the moments that altered a man's path forever. Finding that woman, half dead at his gate, that was such a moment. For better or worse, their fates were now intertwined. With a final glance at his cabin, Elijah turned Midnight toward Redemption Falls, the banker's letter secure in his pocket and the weight of unspoken promises heavy on his shoulders. Redemption Falls had sprung up like many frontier towns, hastily and with more ambition than planning. A single dirt thoroughfare lined with false-fronted buildings stretched between the livery stable and the newly constructed courthouse. What distinguished it from 100 similar settlements was the imposing stone edifice of Hathaway Bank and Trust, a structure more suited to Denver or St. Louis than this dusty corner of Wyoming territory. Elijah tethered Midnight outside the mercantile, nodding curtly to the few townsfolk who acknowledged him. 3 years in the area had done little to make him welcome. He preferred it that way. Fewer questions, fewer complications. "Mason," Sheriff Wade called from the boardwalk. "Unusual to see you in town midweek." Thomas Wade was a barrel-chested man with a neatly trimmed mustache and eyes that missed nothing. He'd been appointed sheriff shortly after Hathaway established his bank, a connection few discussed openly. "Sheriff," Elijah replied, touching the brim of his hat. "Just picking up supplies. Heard anything unusual out your way?" "Stagecoach was robbed yesterday near Widow's Creek." Elijah's expression remained neutral. "Nothing to report." Wade studied him a moment longer. "Well, you see anything suspicious? You ride in and tell me." It wasn't a request. Elijah watched the sheriff amble away before continuing toward the bank. The letter seemed to burn in his pocket. Whatever it contained, he'd be wise to deliver it and remove himself from the affair as quickly as possible. The bank's interior was cool and dim after the bright morning sun. A polished oak counter separated customers from 3 clerks in identical black suits. Crystal chandeliers hung from a pressed tin ceiling, and the floor was actual marble. Shipped at considerable expense, if local gossip was to be believed. "I need to see Mr. Hathaway," Elijah said to the nearest clerk. The young man barely glanced up. "Mr. Hathaway sees clients by appointment only. I have something that belongs to him." Elijah kept his voice low. "A letter. You can leave correspondence with me. It was given to me by a woman who was attacked while carrying it. I believe Mr. Hathaway would prefer discretion." That got the clerk's attention. He disappeared through a door behind the counter, returning moments later with a different man, older, with the hard eyes of someone who enforced rules rather than followed them. "Mr. Jenkins will see you," the clerk said, gesturing toward a side door. Jenkins led Elijah down a carpeted hallway to an antechamber outside what was clearly Hathaway's office. The man conducted a none too subtle assessment of Elijah's worn clothing and trail dust. "You have a letter?" Jenkins asked. "For Mr. Hathaway's hands only," Elijah replied. Jenkins frowned. "Who sent you with this letter?" "A woman who can't deliver. It herself, on account of being nearly beaten to death." Something flickered in Jenkins' eyes, recognition perhaps, or concern. He knocked once on the polished mahogany door before entering, closing it firmly behind him. Elijah waited, studying the antechamber. Paintings of landscapes he recognized as local adorned the walls, though they depicted the rugged terrain as tamer, more welcoming than reality. A large map of Wyoming territory dominated one wall, with particular properties marked in red ink. He noted with unease that the area containing his ranch was among them. The door opened. "Mr. Hathaway will see you," Jenkins announced. Franklin Hathaway rose from behind a massive desk as Elijah entered. In his 50s, with steel-grey hair and a neatly trimmed beard, the banker projected an air of cultured authority that seemed at odds with the frontier setting. "Mr. Mason, is it not? You have something for me?" Elijah removed the envelope from his pocket. "Found a woman collapsed near my property yesterday. She was carrying this, addressed to you." Hathaway's eyes narrowed slightly. "A woman, you say? Did she give her name?" "She wasn't in any condition to talk much. Been badly beaten." "How unfortunate." The banker's tone suggested mild inconvenience, rather than concern. "And where is this woman now?" "Recovering at my place." Hathaway reached for the letter, but Elijah didn't immediately release it. "She risked her life delivering this. I'd like to know what's worth such a price." The banker's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That would be between the sender and myself." "Mr. Mason," he tugged the envelope free, "but I appreciate your concern for my correspondence." As Hathaway broke the seal, Elijah noticed a gold pocket watch chain draped across his vest. The banker absent-mindedly touched the timepiece as he unfolded the letter, a habit born of long practice. The change in Hathaway's expression was subtle but unmistakable. His complexion paled slightly, and his fingers tightened on the paper, creating small creases. To most observers, he might have appeared merely thoughtful, but Elijah had spent years reading men's faces for signs of danger. What he saw now was fear, quickly masked by practiced composure. "Is there a problem?" Elijah asked. Hathaway refolded the letter with deliberate care. "Not at all. Please convey my thanks to your guest for ensuring this reached me." He withdrew the pocket watch, flipping it open with practiced ease. The inscription caught the light momentarily. "To ensure our legacy endures. Jenkins will." "See that you're compensated for your trouble," the banker continued, his tone dismissive. "I don't want your money. Everyone wants something, Mr. Mason." Hathaway's smile was thin. "I simply find it expedient to identify what that might be before conducting business. Then you can pay me with information. Who is she?" "I haven't the faintest idea," the banker replied, though the lie hung transparent between them. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have pressing matters to attend to." Elijah recognized the dismissal but stood his ground. "She's in danger. Whoever did this might come looking." "Then perhaps," Hathaway said coldly, "you should reconsider involving yourself in affairs that don't concern you." The threat veiled. Though it couldn't have been clearer. Elijah nodded once and turned to leave, the weight of unspoken secrets pressing down like thunderclouds before a storm. The ride back to his ranch seemed longer than the journey into town. Elijah couldn't shake the feeling he'd delivered more than just a letter. He'd handed over a lit fuse. Hathaway's reaction, subtle though it was, suggested contents explosive, enough to rattle even that iron composure. He stopped at Doc Sullivan's modest house on the edge of town, but the physician was away delivering a baby at the Peterson homestead. His wife promised to send him to Elijah's ranch once he returned. Approaching his property, Elijah scanned the surroundings with heightened vigilance. Nothing seemed amiss. No fresh hoof prints, no disturbed dust on the trail. Still, he circled. Wide before approaching the cabin, Midnight's hooves silent on the soft earth. A thin curl of smoke rose from his chimney. Someone had tended the fire. Elijah dismounted quietly, drawing his revolver before easing open the door. The mysterious woman sat at his small table, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, hands cradled around a steaming cup. She looked up as he entered, and Elijah found himself momentarily caught by those startling blue eyes, alert now, and assessing him with equal caution. "You're back," she said simply, her voice carrying the refined cadence of Eastern schooling. Elijah holstered his weapon. "And you're up. That's more than I expected." "I'm stronger than I look." Her gaze flickered to the window. "Did you deliver it?" "I did." He hung his hat on a peg by the door. Hathaway seemed quite interested to learn who'd sent it. A shadow crossed her face. "What did you tell him?" "That I found a woman who'd been beaten half to death. Didn't have much else to share." Elijah moved to the stove, pouring himself coffee from the pot she'd prepared. "Though I'm starting to think I should have asked more questions before playing messenger." She studied him over the rim of her cup. "Would you have believed the answers?" "Try me. My name is Charlotte." She hesitated, choosing her next words carefully. "The rest is complicated." "Complicated enough to get you nearly killed," Elijah observed, "and complicated enough to make Franklin Hathaway look like he'd seen a ghost when he read that letter." Charlotte's fingers tightened around her cup. "What else did he say?" "Not much. But he wasn't pleased to learn you're staying here." "Are you asking me to leave?" Challenge flashed in her eyes. "I'm suggesting it might be safer for both of us." Her laugh held no humor. "There's nowhere safe for me in this territory. Not anymore." Elijah studied her more carefully. Despite her injuries, there was a quiet dignity in her posture, a resilience that spoke of someone accustomed to adversity but not defeated by it. While searching for a clean shirt to replace her torn one, he'd found a small photograph tucked inside her pocket, a family portrait showing a stern-faced man in formal attire, a graceful woman seated beside him, and between them, a young girl with familiar blue eyes. The grand house behind them spoke of wealth, the kind rarely seen in these parts. "Doc Sullivan should be by later," he said, changing the subject. "You might have a concussion. I've had worse." The statement held volumes untold. "Who did this to you?" Charlotte looked away. "Men who work for Hathaway, I expect, though they were careful not to identify themselves." "And the letter was from someone who once trusted Hathaway, someone who finally found the courage to expose the truth." Her voice dropped. "Too late to save himself, but perhaps not too late for justice." Elijah set down his cup. "Lady, I don't know what game you're playing, but Hathaway isn't a man to cross lightly. He owns half this town and has the other half in his pocket." "I'm well aware of Mr. Hathaway's influence." Something cold entered her voice. "More than anyone." The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions. Finally, Charlotte sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I should thank you," she said, "for the help. Not many would have taken in a stranger." "Don't thank me yet. Your troubles followed you here." As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching hoofbeats reached them. Elijah moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. "Doc Sullivan?" Charlotte asked. "No. Sheriff Wade." Elijah's expression darkened. "And he's not one for social calls." Charlotte went very still. "Does he work for Hathaway?" "Most everyone around here does, one way or another." Elijah reached for his rifle. "Stay inside." He stepped onto the porch as Wade dismounted. The sheriff's gaze swept past him to the cabin door. "Afternoon, Mason. Heard you had a visitor. News travels fast. Small town." Wade adjusted his gun belt casually. "Mind if I have a word with her?" "She's resting." "This official business," Wade said, his hand coming to rest near his holster. "Someone matching her description may be wanted back east." Elijah remained motionless in the doorway. "You have papers to that effect?" "They're coming." The sheriff's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Meantime, I'd hate to have to arrest you for obstructing justice." The cabin door opened behind Elijah. Charlotte stepped out, her chin lifted despite the visible bruising on her face. "Sheriff Wade," she said calmly, "it's been a long time." Wade's expression flickered with recognition, then carefully rearranged itself into professional detachment. "Ma'am, I don't believe we've met." "No?" Her smile was brittle. "Perhaps you knew me by a different name." 2 days passed with an uneasy truce. Sheriff Wade had departed with reluctance, claiming he'd return with proper documentation. Doc Sullivan had visited, confirming what Elijah already suspected. Charlotte's injuries were deliberate, not accidental. "Someone wanted to hurt this lady," the old physician had muttered, "but not kill her. Not yet, anyway." Charlotte had revealed little more about herself, though she moved about the cabin with increasing strength. Her nightmares, however, told a different story. Twice Elijah had woken to her cries, fragments of pleading that painted a grim picture. "Father, look out, and the mind, it's a trap." On the third morning, supplies running low, Elijah prepared to ride into town. Charlotte watched him check his revolver with practiced hands. "You're expecting trouble," she observed. "I prefer to be prepared for it." He glanced up. "You should stay inside today. Rest." "I've been resting for days." Her frustration was evident. "At least tell me what you've heard about the letter. Has Hathaway made any moves?" Elijah holstered his weapon. "That's what I aim to find out." "Be careful what you ask," she warned. "Questions draw attention." "I don't need to ask." He offered, a rare half-smile. "Men talk freely around someone they think doesn't matter." The ride to town was peaceful, the late summer sun warming his shoulders. Elijah had chosen the quieter of his 2 horses, a dun mare that drew less attention than midnight's striking. Form. In Redemption Falls, blending in was a skill he'd cultivated. The mercantile was busier than usual. Elijah nodded to Mrs. Porter, who ran the store with her husband, and began gathering supplies: coffee, flour, salt. He kept his head down, ears open. "Telling you, Hathaway's been locked in that office for 2 days straight," a heavy-set rancher was saying to his companion. "Jenkins looks like he hasn't slept since Tuesday." "Bank problems, you think?" asked the second man. "Nah. Emma, who cleans at the bank, says he had telegrams going out every hour yesterday. Something's got him spooked." Elijah moved to another aisle, reaching for ammunition on a high shelf. "Mason," a voice called softly. He turned to find Harold. Porter, the store's proprietor, gesturing him toward the back room. Porter was one of the few people in town who treated Elijah with anything approaching friendliness. "Something you should see," Porter murmured, closing the storeroom door behind them. He pulled a yellowed newspaper from beneath the counter. "Was organizing old stock when I found this. Given recent events, thought it might interest you." The Redemption Falls Gazette, dated 15 years earlier. The headline caught Elijah's attention immediately. "Tragedy at Lockwood Mine. Prominent family presumed dead." The article detailed a mine collapse that had claimed the lives of James Lockwood, his wife Elizabeth, and their young daughter Catherine. Lockwood had been the original founder of what would later become Redemption Falls, establishing one of the most productive silver mines in the territory. The family had been inspecting a new tunnel when supports failed. In a tragic twist, Elijah read aloud, "Control of the Lockwood assets will pass to the family's business partner, Franklin Hathaway, who expressed profound grief at the loss." Porter nodded grimly. "Convenient, wasn't it? Within a year, Hathaway had built that bank and started buying up everything that wasn't nailed down." "You suspect foul play?" Elijah asked carefully. "Wasn't my place to question," Porter replied, his voice lowering further. "But there were those who wondered. James Lockwood knew mining better than anyone, wasn't like him to miss bad supports, and some of the rescue team reported strange things about how the tunnel collapsed." "What kind of strange things?" "The kind that got them fired when they mentioned it." Porter took back the newspaper. "Hammond was one of them, old fellow who drinks at Miller's saloon most nights. He was the mine engineer back then." Elijah completed his purchases with a mind full of questions. The timeline fit too neatly. The Lockwood tragedy, Hathaway's rise to power, and now Charlotte's appearance with a letter that had shaken the banker's composure. He was so lost in thought that he nearly collided with Victoria Hathaway outside. The mercantile. Franklin's daughter was a handsome woman in her mid-20s, with her father's calculating eyes softened by her mother's delicate features. "Mr. Mason," she said, recovering smoothly. "How fortunate. Father was just speaking of—" "You?" Elijah tipped his hat, wary. "Miss Hathaway, he mentioned you'd brought a letter from a guest staying at your ranch." Her smile was practiced. "Is she recovering well?" "Well enough. How charitable of you to take in a stranger." Victoria adjusted her parasol, though one wonders what brought her to such a remote location in the first place. "I expect she'll share that when she's ready." Victoria studied him with unconcealed interest. "You know, Mr. Mason, my father has always spoken highly of your property. Such promising land, with the right investment." The implied threat wasn't lost on him. "Your father holds the mortgage. He can speak to me directly if there's an issue." "Oh, there's no issue." Her smile tightened. "Father simply believes in maintaining good relationships with his investments." As Elijah led his horse away, he felt Victoria's gaze following him. The Hathaways were circling, testing his resolve. Whatever Charlotte was involved in had powerful people concerned, people who wouldn't hesitate to crush anyone who stood in their way. At the saloon, Elijah found Hammond easily enough, a weathered old man nursing a whiskey in the corner. The former engineer looked up sharply when Elijah mentioned the Lockwood mine. "Who's asking?" Hammond demanded, rheumy eyes suddenly alert. "Someone who found a woman with a letter that's got Franklin Hathaway looking over his shoulder." Hammond set down his glass with a trembling hand. "She came back then, after all these years." "Who came back?" The old engineer leaned forward, his voice barely audible. "Catherine Lockwood, the girl everyone thought died in that mine." Elijah returned to his ranch with Hammond's words echoing in his mind. The old engineer had shared little more, suddenly wary of being overheard in the crowded saloon. "Not here," he'd muttered. "Too many ears work for Hathaway." But his parting words carried weight. "If she is who I think, she's in more danger than she knows." Charlotte was waiting on the porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders despite the warm afternoon. Her bruises had faded to yellowish smudges, but shadows beneath her eyes suggested sleep remained elusive. "You found something," she said, reading his expression as he dismounted. Elijah secured his horse before answering. "The Lockwood mine disaster. 15 years ago." Something flickered across her face, pain, perhaps, or fear. "What of it?" "I met a man who worked there. Hammond. He seemed to think—" "Mr. Mason." The call came from the road, interrupting whatever Elijah had been about. To say, a rider approached, one of Hathaway's men by the look of his well-tailored clothes and expensive mount. Charlotte retreated inside without a word. "Jenkins," Elijah acknowledged, as the banker's right-hand man reined in his horse. "What brings you?" "Out here? Mr. Hathaway requests your presence at the bank tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp." Jenkins delivered the message with practiced neutrality. "He wishes to discuss your mortgage situation. My payments are current. Nevertheless, he insists on a meeting." Jenkins produced an envelope from his coat. "He asked me to deliver this. Said it might help you understand the importance of our discussion." Elijah took the envelope, noting its official appearance. "And if I decline?" Jenkins' smile was thin. "Mr. Hathaway rarely extends second invitations." With a tip of his hat, he turned his horse and rode away. Inside, Charlotte stood by the window, watching Jenkins' departure. What did he want? Elijah broke the seal on the envelope and removed several legal documents. His expression darkened as he read, "It's the deed to my ranch, and a notice that Hathaway's calling in my loan early." "Can he do that?" "There's fine print in these frontier bank loans," Elijah's jaw tightened, "gives them the right to demand full payment under certain conditions." "What conditions?" "Engaging in activities contrary to the bank's interests seems to be the one he's citing." He looked up at her. "Harboring you apparently qualifies." Charlotte's face paled. "I've brought this trouble to your door. I should go." "And where would you go?" "Back to Redemption Falls, where Hathaway's men nearly killed you once already." Elijah set the papers aside. "Besides, running now would only confirm whatever he suspects." "Which is what exactly?" Elijah studied her, weighing what he'd learned against her continued secrecy. "That depends on who you really are, Miss Lockwood." Charlotte went very still, her fingers gripping the back of a chair. For a long moment she said nothing, her eyes searching his face. "Hammond recognized you," Elijah continued quietly, "or at least he thought he did." "Hammond was kind to me as a child," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "He used to bring me rock samples from new tunnels, taught me to identify the different ores." "Then it's true. You're Catherine Lockwood." Her laugh held no humor. "What's left of her, yes. You were supposed to have died in that mine collapse. That was the plan." Bitterness edged her words. "Fortunately for me, I was delayed that day. By the time I reached the mine entrance, the tunnel had already collapsed with my parents inside. And afterward, I was 10 years old in shock, covered in dust from trying to dig through the rubble with my bare hands." Her gaze turned distant. "When I heard Hathaway's men coming, something warned me to hide. I ran into the hills. A family of settlers found me wandering 3 days later. They took me east with them, raised me as their own. But now you're back. Now I'm back." Charlotte straightened, a flash of steel entering her bearing, with proof that what happened wasn't an accident. The next morning found Elijah approaching the Hathaway bank precisely at 9. He'd left Charlotte at the ranch with his spare revolver, and strict instructions to remain hidden. Franklin Hathaway greeted him with the practiced cordiality of a man accustomed to determining others' fates. "Mr. Mason, prompt as always. Please take a seat." The banker's office seemed designed to intimidate. Oversized furniture, towering bookshelves, and a desk large enough to emphasize the distance between them. A map of the territory hung prominently on one wall with certain properties marked in red ink. "I understand you received my message," Hathaway began, settling into his leather chair. "Hard to miss a threat to take my land," Elijah replied evenly. "Not a threat, Mr. Mason, merely a business reality." Hathaway steepled his fingers. "Your property has become rather central to my development plans for the region. Plans you've never mentioned before. Opportunities arise unexpectedly." The banker reached into a drawer, withdrawing a document. "I'm prepared to offer you a generous sum, twice what you paid for that hard-scrabble patch. More than fair, considering its limitations." Elijah didn't reach for the paper. "And if I'm not interested in selling, then I would be forced to exercise the acceleration clause in your mortgage." Hathaway's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, there is an alternative. I'm listening. Your guest." Hathaway leaned forward slightly. "Tell me what she's shared with you, what her purpose is in coming here, and I'll not only forgive your current mortgage, but grant you clear title to the property." The door opened before Elijah could respond. Victoria Hathaway entered, elegant in a deep blue dress that emphasized her figure. She offered Elijah a smile that contained equal parts charm and assessment. "Father, I didn't realize you had an appointment." Her tone suggested she knew exactly what was happening. "Just concluding some business with Mr. Mason." Hathaway gestured to his daughter. "I believe you've met Victoria?" "Briefly," Elijah acknowledged, standing. Victoria extended her hand. "Mr. Mason was kind enough to assist a woman in distress, Father. Such gallantry deserves recognition, not pressure." Something passed between father and daughter, a silent communication born of years of shared purposes. Hathaway nodded slightly. "Perhaps my approach has been too direct," he conceded. "Take some time to consider my offer, Mr. Mason. But not too much time. Opportunities, like threats, have a way of expiring when ignored." The ride home from town left Elijah with much to consider. Hathaway's proposition amounted to simple blackmail. Betray Charlotte or lose everything. Neither option sat well with him. He found her in the small vegetable garden behind his cabin, kneeling in the dirt despite her injuries. She'd pulled weeds from between the struggling tomato plants and appeared to have reorganized his haphazard rows. "You have good soil here," she said without looking up, "but your irrigation needs work." "Didn't realize you knew about farming." Charlotte sat back on her heels, brushing dirt from her hands. The family that took me in had a small farm in Pennsylvania. I learned, she finally looked at him, how was your meeting with Hathaway? About what you'd expect. Elijah leaned against the fence post. He wants information about you in exchange for my ranch. And if you refuse, he'll find a way to take it anyway. Charlotte stood, wincing slightly at the movement. I never meant to cost you your home. It's not lost yet. Elijah studied her face, now suffused with genuine regret. Why don't we start with the truth? All of it this time. Inside, Charlotte settled at the table while Elijah made coffee. The domestic normalcy of the scene belied the weight of their conversation. I was 10 when the mine collapsed, she began, her fingers tracing patterns on the wooden tabletop. My parents were inspecting a new silver vein. I was supposed to join them. Father believed in teaching me the business from an early age, but my horse threw a shoe on the trail. By the time I arrived, there was nothing but smoke and rubble. And Hathaway, he was there almost immediately, taking charge of the rescue effort. Bitterness edged her voice. I remember him kneeling beside me, promising they'd find my parents. But something in his eyes. She shook her head. Even as a child, I knew he was lying. So you ran. Charlotte nodded. The Peterson family found me wandering in the hills. They were heading east to Pennsylvania. When I told them what happened, they were afraid. Hathaway already had influence even then. They decided to take me with them, told everyone I was their niece from Colorado. And you've been living as Charlotte Peterson ever since? Yes. She reached beneath her collar and withdrew a silver locket on a thin chain. This is all I have left of before. Elijah accepted the locket when she offered it. Inside was a tiny portrait of a stern-faced man and a lock of dark hair. The initials KL were engraved on the back. Why come back now? He asked, returning. The keepsake, because of Martin Wilkes. She met his eyes. Hathaway's former partner and the man who wrote that letter. I don't recall that name from town. You wouldn't. He left Redemption Falls over a decade ago, after he and Hathaway had some kind of falling out. Charlotte's expression darkened. 6 months ago, he tracked me down in Philadelphia. He was dying, consumption, and wanted to clear his conscience. About the mine collapse, she nodded. It wasn't an accident. Wilkes helped Hathaway plant dynamite to trigger a collapse, making it look like faulty supports. They needed my father out of the way to gain control of the mine and his other holdings. And the letter? His signed confession, along with details of where to find proof, records of dynamite purchases, payoffs to workers who helped set the charges, bank transfers that don't add up. Charlotte's voice remained steady, though her hands had clenched into fists. Enough evidence to bring Hathaway down, if I can access it. Elijah poured coffee for them both, giving himself time to process her story. That's why they tried to stop you. They knew you were coming. Wilkes must have been watched, or perhaps he wasn't as discreet as he thought when he sought me out. She accepted the cup with a small nod of thanks. Either way, Hathaway's men were waiting when I arrived in the territory. If you hadn't found me, the unfinished sentence hung between them. Later that afternoon, as the sun began its descent behind the distant mountains, they sat on Elijah's porch. The day's heat was fading, leaving behind the pleasant warmth of late summer. Charlotte had insisted on helping with chores, proving surprisingly capable around the ranch, despite her lingering injuries. Your leg still bothers you, Elijah observed as she massaged her knee absently. Old injury. The night I ran from the mine, I fell down a ravine. Never healed quite right. She smiled faintly. Small price to pay for surviving. What will you do if you succeed? After Hathaway pays for what he did? Charlotte looked out over the rolling landscape, painted gold by the setting sun. Restore what was stolen. The Lockwood holdings were extensive, not just the mine, but timber rights, water, access land. My father believed in building something lasting. Her voice softened. He used to say that wealth was only valuable if it created something good. Sounds like a man worth remembering. He was. She turned to face him. "What about you? Why this place so far from everything?" Elijah was silent for a moment. Few had ever asked about his choices, and fewer still had earned an honest answer. "After the war, I couldn't go home. Too many ghosts." He gazed toward the horizon. "Needed open space, room to breathe. This land doesn't ask questions or expect explanations, yet you took in a stranger with trouble written all over her." The observation hung between them, a question not quite asked. "Maybe I recognize something," Elijah finally said. "Someone running from ghosts of their own." Their eyes met, a moment of understanding passing between them. Two souls shaped by loss, finding unexpected common ground. Charlotte's hand moved across the weathered porch boards, her fingers coming to rest near his. "Thank you," she said simply, "for believing me when you had every reason not to." As twilight deepened around them, neither moved to go inside, content in a silence that no longer needed filling. Dawn broke with a stillness that Elijah had learned to distrust. Too quiet meant wildlife had been disturbed, often by human presence. He rose before sunrise, checking his rifle before stepping onto the porch. Nothing seemed amiss, yet the hair on the back of his neck stood on end. Years of scouting during the war had taught him to recognize the feeling of being watched. Charlotte emerged from the cabin, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the morning chill. "Something wrong?" "Not sure." Elijah scanned the tree line. "Stay inside today. I'm not afraid of Hathaway's men. Maybe you should be." He turned to face her. "This isn't Philadelphia. Out here, men disappear without questions being asked." "Yeah." Sound of approaching hoofbeats ended their conversation. Sheriff Wade appeared around the bend in the road, riding alone. His badge caught the first rays of sunlight as he approached, tarnished silver that had seen better days, much like the man who wore it. "Trouble?" Charlotte asked quietly. "We'll see." Elijah stepped forward as Wade dismounted. "Sheriff, early for social calls." Wade removed his hat, revealing thinning hair slicked with pomade. "This isn't social, Mason." His gaze shifted to Charlotte. "Ma'am." "Sheriff," she acknowledged, her posture stiffening. "Mind if we talk privately?" Wade asked Elijah. "Anything you have to say, you can say in front of her." Wade's mouth tightened. "Suit yourself." He hooked his thumbs in his belt. "Got an interesting telegram yesterday. Seems there's a woman wanted for questioning back east. Fraud, theft of documents, identity misrepresentation." "Sounds serious," Elijah replied evenly. "It is." Wade studied Charlotte. "Description matches your guest here. Even mentioned she might use the name Charlotte." "Curious timing," she observed, "almost as if someone sent that telegram after learning I was here." "I don't much care about the timing, ma'am." Wade's voice hardened. "I care about upholding the law in my jurisdiction." "Since when does the law in redemption falls extend beyond Hathaway's interests?" Charlotte challenged. The sheriff's expression darkened. "Careful now. That kind of talk could be construed as slander." "It's not slander if it's true," she replied. "You worked for Hathaway before you pinned on that badge, didn't you, Thomas? Head of security at his Denver office, if I recall correctly." Surprise flickered across Wade's face. "You've been misinformed." "I don't think so." Charlotte stepped closer. "Just as I don't think you're here on official business. Hathaway sent you to intimidate us." Wade's hand drifted toward his holster. "I could take you in right now." Elijah shifted, placing himself between them. "On what grounds?" "A convenient telegram with no supporting documentation. Harboring a fugitive would make you an accessory, Mason." Wade's eyes narrowed. "That ranch of yours would go to auction mighty quick." "Is that a threat or a promise?" Elijah asked quietly. Tension crackled between them. Wade finally broke the silence with a harsh laugh. "Just doing my duty, giving fair warning." He replaced his hat. "But have it your way. Papers should arrive within the week, then we'll do this official-like." As Wade mounted his horse, he leaned down. "Word of advice, Mason. I've known Franklin Hathaway for 15 years, never seen him lose a fight he set his mind to winning." His gaze shifted to Charlotte. "Whatever she's promised you, it's not worth it." They watched in silence as the sheriff rode away. Once he was out of sight, Charlotte released a shaky breath. "He knows who I am." "Seems that way." Elijah turned toward the cabin. "We should check if anything's missing." Inside, Charlotte moved directly to her small bundle of possessions while Elijah examined the door and windows. Nothing seemed disturbed, but years of living alone had made him methodical. "The letter from Wilkes is safe," Charlotte confirmed, withdrawing it from inside her boot. "But we need to move faster now. Wade's visit was a warning. Next time they won't come alone or empty-handed." Elijah nodded. "What's our next step?" "The evidence Wilkes mentioned." She unfolded the letter, scanning its contents. "According to this, there are ledgers hidden in a lockbox at the abandoned Lockwood mine office. Records of the dynamite purchase. Payoffs to the men who helped set the charges. The mine's been closed for years, probably not much left standing." Wilkes was specific about where to look. Charlotte pointed to a paragraph in the letter. "Beneath the floorboards in what was my father's office. It's our best chance at proof that would stand up in court." Elijah considered their options. "We'll need help. That area's likely watched, especially now that Hathaway knows you're back. Hammond might assist us," Charlotte suggested. "He knew the mine better than anyone. And we should assume Wade searched the cabin while we were both away." Elijah checked his saddlebags, noticing subtle signs of disturbance. "Someone's been through these," Charlotte's expression tightened. "Looking for the letter, or anything that could identify you." Elijah moved to the window, scanning the property with renewed vigilance. "We're being watched. Probably have been since Wade's first visit. Then we're running out of time." Charlotte straightened, a determined set to her jaw. "I need to return to town, speak with Hammond directly." "Too dangerous. Hathaway's men will be looking for you. They're looking for a battered woman calling herself Charlotte." A calculated gleam entered her eyes. "Not a confident young man passing through on business." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting disguise." "I'm suggesting we use their expectations against them." Charlotte gestured to her cropped hair, still short from her previous masquerade. "It worked to get me this far. With proper clothing and the right demeanor, I can move through town unrecognized. It's risky. Everything about this is risky." Her voice softened. "I've spent 15 years preparing for this moment, Elijah. I won't let fear stop me now that I'm so close." Something in her determination resonated with him. The quiet resolve of someone who had faced their worst fears and emerged stronger. It was a quality he recognized, having seen it in the best men he'd served with during the war. "All right," he conceded, "but we do this carefully, and I'm coming with you." That evening, with the cabin secure and a small fire warding off the night's chill, Charlotte finally shared the complete contents of Martin Wilkes's letter. She spread the well-worn pages on the table between them, the neat handwriting a stark contrast to the devastating words they contained. "I should have shown you this sooner," she admitted. "Trust doesn't come easily after 15 years of looking over my shoulder." Elijah nodded in understanding. "May I?" At her assent, he began to read. "My dear Miss Catherine, by the time you receive this letter, I will have departed this world. The consumption that has claimed my lungs offers one blessing: time to confront the sins of my past before meeting my Maker. What I must confess will bring you no peace, only confirmation of suspicions you likely harbored. The tragedy that claimed your parents' lives was no accident, but a deliberate act conceived by Franklin Hathaway and executed with my reluctant assistance. Your father discovered irregularities in our accounting, funds diverted by Hathaway to secure his position and influence. When confronted, Hathaway proposed a solution that seemed merely dishonest rather than monstrous. Stage a minor incident at the mine, enough to discredit your father and force him to sell his interests. I agreed to this plan, God forgive me. What I did not agree to was murder. On April 17, 1860, while inspecting the new silver vein, charges were detonated that should have caused minimal damage. Instead, Hathaway had ordered additional explosives placed without my knowledge. The resulting collapse buried your parents and was meant to claim you as well. When word came that you had not been found among the dead, Hathaway sent men to ensure there would be no witnesses. Your disappearance was both a miracle and a torment to me. Relief that you had somehow escaped, fear that you remained in danger, and shame that I lacked the courage to speak out. Elijah looked up from the pages, finding Charlotte's eyes fixed on the dancing flames in the fireplace, her expression unreadable. "There's more," she said quietly. He continued reading. "I have spent 15 years seeking atonement through small resistances, preserving documents, securing evidence, waiting for an opportunity. That opportunity never came, and now my time grows short. Enclosed, you will find details of where this evidence is hidden. In the abandoned Lockwood mine office, beneath the floorboards where your father's desk once stood, a lockbox contains ledgers recording dynamite purchases exceeding what any legitimate mining operation would require. In Hathaway's Denver bank, vault records document the transfer of your family's assets under suspicious circumstances. A banker named Phillips assisted me in securing copies, which are stored in a safety deposit box at First National Bank of Denver under the name William Carver. Most damning of all, Hathaway keeps a personal journal in which he documented our plan. He believes it's secure in his home safe, but I have discovered its combination, 17 to 34-8, the date of the accident reversed. With these 3 pieces of evidence, you can reclaim your birthright and bring Hathaway to justice. But be warned, he has grown only more dangerous with time and power. His influence extends throughout the territory, and he will stop at nothing to protect his empire. If there is mercy in this world or the next, perhaps this information will help right the terrible wrong I helped commit. I go to my grave with the weight of your parents' deaths heavy on my soul. With deepest remorse, Martin Wilkes' silence filled the cabin as Elijah set down the final page. Charlotte remained motionless, her gaze still fixed on the fire. "Now you understand," she finally said, "why Hathaway looked like he'd seen a ghost when you delivered this. It's his death warrant, signed by his former partner. If we can secure the evidence," Elijah cautioned. "We will." Her voice hardened with resolve. "Wilkes may have lacked courage in life, but in death, he's given me the means to finish this." Elijah studied the letter again. 3 locations. The mine office seems our best starting point. Yes, the Denver bank would require travel, and Hathaway's safe. She shook her head. "That's a last resort. The lockbox might not still be there after 15 years. It will be." Charlotte's certainty was absolute. My father's office had a false floor beneath his desk, a feature known only to family. If Wilkes knew about it, he must have seen my father use it. Elijah considered their next steps carefully. "We'll need supplies, proper tools to extract the floorboards without damage, and Hammond's help to navigate what's left of the mine safely. And my disguise for town." Charlotte rose, pacing the small confines of the cabin. "Tomorrow we can—" The sharp crack of a rifle shot cut through the night, followed instantly by the sound of shattering glass. Both of them dropped to the floor as a second shot splintered the window frame. "Crawl to the back," Elijah ordered. Reaching for his rifle propped against the wall, another shot, another window shattered. Glass rained down as they made their way across the floor. Charlotte grabbed the letter, tucking it inside her shirt as they moved. "How many?" she whispered. "Can't tell." Elijah peered carefully around the edge of the window. The moonless night revealed nothing but shadows. At least 2 positions, maybe more. "They're not trying to kill us," Charlotte observed, as another shot deliberately struck the chimney. "They would have waited until we were silhouetted against the lamp." "Warning shots," Elijah agreed. "Hathaway's way of saying he's watching." They remained in darkness for over an hour, listening as the distant riders eventually departed. Only, when the night had been silent for some time, did Elijah risk lighting a small lamp. "We move tomorrow," Charlotte said, her face set with determination as she smoothed out Wilkes's crumpled letter. No more waiting. Elijah nodded, knowing the decision had been made for them. First light will head to town while they think we're still hiding. The transformation was remarkable. With her hair slicked back, face smudged with dirt, and dressed in Elijah's old clothes, rolled at the cuffs and cinched tight at the waist, Charlotte became Charlie, a young man passing through on business. She studied her reflection in Elijah's small shaving mirror, adjusting her posture to disguise feminine mannerisms. "Will it work?" she asked, pitching her voice lower. "Keep your head down and don't speak more than necessary." Elijah assessed her critically. "People see what they expect to see. No one's looking for a young man." They left at first light, riding separate paths into town to avoid drawing attention. Charlotte took the less-traveled eastern route, while Elijah followed the main road, planning to rendezvous at Miller's saloon, where Hammond could often be found. Redemption Falls was already stirring when Elijah arrived. He stabled his horse and moved through town with deliberate casualness, noting the increased presence of Hathaway's men on the streets. News of last night's warning shots had clearly traveled fast. At the saloon, the morning crowd was sparse, a few miners starting early, a traveling salesman reviewing his wares, and in the corner, Hammond nursing what appeared to be coffee, rather, than his usual whiskey. The old engineer looked up sharply as Elijah approached. "Didn't expect to see you in town," Hammond muttered. "Not after last night's excitement." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "News travels fast. Jenkins was bragging about teaching you a lesson." Hammond's rheumy eyes darted around the room. "Said they put the fear of God into you and your lady friend." "That's so." Elijah ordered coffee from the passing barkeep before continuing quietly. "We need your help, Hammond. It concerns the Lockwood mine." The old man's fingers tightened around his cup. "Already told you more than was safe. Catherine needs to retrieve something from her father's office. Something that could prove what really happened." Hammond's weathered face paled. "So it is her. I wasn't sure." "It is. And she has a letter from Martin Wilkes confessing everything." "Wilkes?" Hammond shook his head in disbelief. "That yellow-bellied—" The saloon doors swung open, admitting a slender young man who moved with subtle caution. Despite the disguise, Elijah recognized Charlotte immediately. She ordered a drink at the bar before making her way to their table, head lowered beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "This seat taken?" she asked gruffly. Hammond squinted up at her, confusion giving way to astonishment as recognition dawned. "Well, I'll be—" "Keep your voice down," Elijah warned. Charlotte settled beside them, maintaining her masculine posture. "Mr. Hammond, it's been a long time." The old engineer stared openly now. "Last time I saw you, you were just a little thing, following your daddy around the mine office, asking questions that would stump a college professor." His voice thickened. "When they said you died in that collapse, that's what Hathaway wanted. Everyone to believe." Charlotte leaned forward. "But now I'm back to set things right, and I need your help." Hammond glanced nervously around the saloon. "Not here. Too many ears." "Where then?" "The apothecary." Hammond drained his cup. "Maylin's place. Her father worked the mine before the accident. No love lost for Hathaway in that family. They separated again outside the saloon, taking different routes to the small shop at the edge of town. The apothecary was marked by a simple sign showing a mortar and pestle. Inside, fragrant herbs hung from the ceiling, and shelves lined with jars of mysterious contents filled the walls. A young Chinese woman looked up from behind the counter, her wary expression softening at the sight of Hammond. "Uncle James, you bring friends today? Friends who need privacy and discretion, May." Hammond gestured to the back room. "This concerns the mine." Understanding flashed in her eyes. Without a word, she locked the front door and pulled down the shade before leading them through a beaded curtain to a small back room dominated by a wooden table. Only when the curtain closed behind them did Charlotte remove her hat, shaking out her short hair. "This is Catherine Lockwood," Hammond announced. Maylin's composure broke momentarily. her hand flying to her mouth. "But you survived," Charlotte finished, "and have returned with proof of what Hathaway did to my family." Elijah laid out their situation in concise terms, while Charlotte produced Wilkes's letter. Both Hammond and Mei Lin read it with growing anger. "My father always said the collapse was wrong," Mei Lin said when she finished. "The support beams were new, inspected the week before. He lost 3 friends that day, and was fired when he questioned it," Hammond added grimly. "We need to reach the old mine office," Charlotte explained. "According to Wilkes, there's evidence hidden beneath the floorboards." Hammond rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "The main buildings were torn down years ago, but the office might still be standing. It was built more substantial than the rest." "Is it watched?" Elijah asked. "Probably not directly," the engineer replied. "But Hathaway owns all that land now, calls it the northern extension of his holdings. Anyone approaching would be noticed. We need a reason to be there that won't raise suspicion." Charlotte mused. Mei Lin, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke up. "The old Chinese cemetery lies beyond the mine. My people still visit to honor ancestors buried there." She glanced at Charlotte. "A group making offerings would not be questioned." "I can't pass as Chinese," Charlotte objected. "No," Mei agreed with a small smile, "but as my American friend paying respects, accompanying our group? That might work." Hammond nodded slowly. "It could get you to the general area, but the office itself is separated from the cemetery by almost half a mile of open ground." "We'll need a diversion," Elijah said. "Something to draw attention away from the office while we search." "I might be able to help with that too," Mei offered. "My cousin works for the railroad. They're blasting rock for the new line north of town. A scheduled detonation would cover any noise you make." As they refined their plan, a sharp knock at the front door interrupted their discussion. Mei Lin slipped through the curtain, while Charlotte quickly replaced her hat. They heard muffled voices, then Mei returned, her expression tense. "Sheriff Wade is asking questions door to door," she reported. "Looking for a woman matching Miss Lockwood's description, or anyone helping her." "They're closing the net," Elijah observed grimly. Hammond pushed himself to his feet. "Then we move tomorrow at dawn. The offering procession leaves at first light. Be ready." Dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of amber, and rose as Charlotte and Elijah joined the small procession, winding its way toward the old Chinese cemetery. Mei Lin had provided traditional mourning clothes, simple white garments that covered Charlotte's figure and face. Elijah followed at a respectful distance, posing as hired protection for the mourners. The abandoned Lockwood mine loomed ahead, its weathered structures standing like tombstones against the brightening sky. The main shaft entrance had collapsed years ago, leaving only the skeletal remains of the processing buildings and, set apart on a small rise, the surprisingly intact mine office. "Remember," Hammond murmured as they approached the cemetery turnoff, "you have 1 hour before the railroad blast. It'll provide cover for your departure, but you need former self." Somewhere in those hills lay her parents' bodies, never recovered after the collapse. As planned, the procession continued toward the cemetery, while Charlotte, Elijah, and Hammond separated, circling behind a stand of scrub pine toward the office. Hammond carried an old miner's lantern, unlit for now, and a canvas bag of tools. "Hathaway's men patrol this area every few hours," Hammond warned as they crouched behind the building. "Last one passed about 30 minutes ago, so we should have time." The office door hung askew on rusted hinges. Inside, dust and debris covered what remained of the furniture. Sunlight filtered through broken windows, illuminating dancing particles in the stale air. Charlotte stood frozen in the doorway, memories washing over her. "It's smaller than I remembered." "You were smaller then," Hammond replied gently. Elijah checked the perimeter while Charlotte oriented herself. "Father's desk was here," she said, crossing to the far corner. "The safe was behind it, and he kept his work table by the window for the light. Though the furniture was gone, the ghost of its arrangement remained visible in the weathered floorboards." Charlotte knelt, running her fingers along the wooden planks until she found what she sought. A nearly invisible seam in the pattern. "Here," she whispered. "Help me pry this up." Hammond produced a pry bar from his bag, working it carefully into the seam. With a groan of protesting wood, a section of flooring lifted, revealing a small cavity beneath. Charlotte reached in, her fingers closing around a metal box, roughly the size of a large book. "It's still here," she breathed, disbelief and triumph mingling in her voice. The lockbox was sealed with a simple combination lock. Charlotte hesitated only briefly before turning the dials to 8 to 1760. Her birthday. The lock clicked open. Inside lay several ledgers bound in faded leather, a packet of letters tied with string, and a small leather pouch. Charlotte withdrew the topmost ledger with trembling hands. "These are the mine accounts," she confirmed, flipping through pages of meticulous entries. "Look here. April 10th, 1860. Special supplies acquired through Westbrook Trading, Denver. Paid in cash, no receipt." Hammond peered over her shoulder. Westbrook didn't sell mining supplies. They were military contractors. Gunpowder, dynamite, blasting caps. "And here," Charlotte continued, her finger tracing another entry, "April. Into final preparations complete for expansion of North Tunnel. That's where my parents died the next day." Elijah, keeping watch by the window, suddenly stiffened. "Someone's coming! Rider from the east." Charlotte quickly gathered the materials, returning them to the lockbox. "We need to take this with us." No time to replace the floorboard properly. Hammond warned. "Leave it," Elijah decided. "They'll know someone was here regardless. Let's move." They slipped out the back door just as the rider crested the hill. Taking cover behind a collapsed outbuilding, they watched as one of Hathaway's men dismounted, tethering his horse to what remained of a hitching post. "Routine patrol," Hammond whispered. "He'll check the main buildings first." Clutching the precious lockbox, Charlotte followed as they crept toward a small drainage tunnel that Hammond had identified as their escape route. The narrow passage, once used to divert water from the mine, would lead them to a ravine beyond Hathaway's patrol routes. "This tunnel connects to part of the old mine workings," Hammond explained as they reached the rust-streaked culvert. "We'll need the lantern now." The passage was cramped and dank, forcing them to crouch as they made their way forward. Hammond led with the lantern, its flickering light casting monstrous shadows on the rough-hewn walls. The air grew thick with the scent of wet stone and old timber. The main collapse happened further in, Hammond assured them, as the tunnel widened into what had once been a secondary shaft. This section was abandoned years before, deemed unprofitable. Charlotte found herself holding her breath as they moved deeper into the mountain that had claimed her parents. The weight of earth above pressed down on her consciousness more than her shoulders. "We need to turn here," Hammond indicated a junction ahead. "Then follow the—" A deep rumble interrupted him, distant but unmistakable. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. "That's not the railroad blast," Elijah said sharply. "Too early." "No," Hammond agreed, his face pale in the lantern light. "That came from behind us, near the entrance." "Someone collapsed our exit," Charlotte realized. A second rumble, closer this time, sent a shower of loose rock clattering around them. Hammond raised the lantern higher, his expression grim. "They're trying to bury us in here, just like your parents." "Is there another way out?" Elijah demanded. "The old emergency shaft, if it's still passable." Hammond pointed ahead. "We need to move quickly." They hurried forward as more debris rained down, the ancient timbers groaning under shifting pressures. Charlotte clutched the lockbox to her chest, the irony not lost on her. Trapped in the same mine that had claimed her family, holding evidence of their murder. The passage narrowed again, forcing them to crawl in places. A third explosion, more distant, sent reverberations through the rock. Hammond paused, listening intently. "That was the railroad blast," he confirmed. "Right on schedule." "Will anyone notice the earlier explosions?" Charlotte asked. "Doubtful. They'll assume it's all part of the railroad work." The tunnel suddenly opened into a larger chamber. Hammond raised the lantern, revealing a vertical shaft with a broken ladder leading upward. Daylight, faint but unmistakable, filtered down from above. "The emergency exit," he announced, "hasn't been used in 15 years, but it's our only chance." As Elijah tested the ancient ladder's strength, Charlotte stared at the crumbling walls, surrounding them, imagining her father's final moments in this mountain's deadly embrace. The grief she had carefully contained for 15 years threatened to overwhelm her. "Catherine," Elijah's voice cut through her thoughts. "We need to climb. Now." Their escape from the mine had been narrow but successful. The ancient emergency shaft had led them to a ravine well beyond the regular patrol routes, allowing them to circle back to town undetected. Hammond had returned to his rooms above the saloon, taking the lockbox for safekeeping, his modest quarters being less likely to be searched than Elijah's ranch. 2 days later, Elijah rode into Redemption Falls alone, his horse's hooves kicking up dust from the dry street. Charlotte remained, hidden at the ranch, reviewing the documents they'd recovered and planning their next move. The lockbox had yielded more than they'd hoped, not just ledgers documenting the dynamite purchase, but letters between Hathaway and Wilkes discussing how to eliminate obstacles to their plans. Porter's mercantile was busy when Elijah entered, townsfolk gathering supplies before an approaching storm. He moved through the crowded aisles, collecting the items on his list while keeping an ear tuned to local gossip. "Mason," Harold Porter appeared at his elbow. "Heard there was some trouble out at the old mine. Railroad blast went wrong there." "Saying," Elijah kept his expression neutral. "That's so. Strange thing is, Sheriff Wade was asking if anyone had seen you or your young friend in town that morning." Porter's voice lowered. "Seemed mighty interested in your whereabouts." "I appreciate the warning." As Elijah completed his purchases, the mercantile door opened, admitting Victoria Hathaway. Conversation quieted momentarily as the banker's daughter made her way through the store, nodding graciously to those who acknowledged her. Elijah paid Porter and gathered his supplies, intending to leave without interaction. He had nearly reached the door when Victoria called his name. "Mr. Mason, what fortunate timing!" Her smile was practiced perfection. "I was hoping for a word." Elijah nodded curtly, conscious of curious eyes watching their exchange. "Miss Hathaway, would you be so kind as to assist me with my parcels? My driver is attending to another errand. It wasn't truly a request." Elijah found himself walking beside Victoria toward her waiting carriage, her small purchases in hand, alongside his own bulkier supplies. "Your ranch guest seems to have vanished," Victoria observed once they were beyond immediate earshot. "Father is quite concerned for her welfare." "Is that what he calls it? Concern?" Victoria's smile never faltered, though something shifted in her eyes. "Perhaps we could speak more privately. The cafe serves an excellent tea." Against his better judgment, Elijah found himself seated across from Victoria at the town's only cafe. The establishment was nearly empty at this hour, offering a semblance of privacy. "I'll be direct, Mr. Mason." Victoria stirred her tea with delicate precision. "Father believes your guest is making claims about our family that could prove disruptive to the community." "Is that what he told you? That she's making claims?" "He says she's disturbed, that she suffered some trauma years ago that left her mind unbalanced." Victoria studied him carefully. "That she may believe herself to be someone she's not." Elijah met her gaze steadily. "And you believe that?" "I believe my father is a businessman who has transformed this territory from a lawless outpost to a thriving community." She set down her spoon. "But I also believe that even good men can make grave mistakes." The unexpected response gave Elijah pause. Victoria reached into her reticule and withdrew a small leather journal, placing it on the table between them. "I found this among my father's private papers," she said quietly. "I think you and your friend might find it illuminating." Elijah made no move to take it. "Why show this to me?" "Because contrary to what you might think, Mr. Mason, I care about justice." Something vulnerable flickered across her composed features. And because I have questions about my father's business dealings that have gone unanswered for too long, this could implicate your father in serious crimes. I'm aware. Victoria pushed the journal closer. I've made my own copy of the relevant passages. What you do with this information is your choice. Elijah studied her, searching for signs of deception. Victoria Hathaway had her father's calculating intelligence, but there was something else there, a conscience perhaps that Franklin lacked. Why now? He asked. Victoria glanced down, a rare moment of uncertainty. I was raised to believe that our family's fortune was built through foresight and hard work. If that foundation is built on something else entirely. She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. I need to know the truth as much as she does, even if that truth destroys your father. Even then, Victoria's voice hardened. Though I warn you, he suspects I've been looking through his papers. The safe combination has been changed, and he's doubled the guards at our home. He knows you're here now. He believes I'm shopping for new dress fabric. A hint of defiance colored her words. I've played the obedient daughter for years, Mr. Mason. It provides certain freedoms. Elijah carefully took the journal, tucking it inside his coat. This could be a trap. It could be. Victoria sipped her tea. But ask yourself, what would I gain from such deception when I could simply have Sheriff Wade arrest you both? As they parted outside the cafe, Victoria touched his arm lightly. One more thing, Mr. Mason. Father is hosting the Founders' Day celebration next week. Every person of consequence in the territory will attend. Her meaning was clear. An opportunity. For public exposure. I'll pass that along, Elijah replied carefully. And Mr. Mason, Victoria's voice dropped further. I find your loyalty admirable. She's fortunate to have such a champion. The comment held layers of meaning that Elijah chose not to examine as he mounted his horse and turned toward home. The journal in his coat pocket felt impossibly heavy, potentially containing the final evidence they needed, or a carefully crafted trap. Charlotte was waiting on the porch when he arrived, her face tight with anxiety that relaxed at the sight of him. You're late. I was worried. Had an unexpected meeting. He dismounted, producing Victoria's journal. The banker's daughter sends her regards. Charlotte's eyes widened. Victoria approached you? Why? Says she wants the truth. Gave me this from her father's private papers. He handed her the journal. Could be genuine, could be a trap. They moved inside as the first raindrops began to fall, the approaching storm finally breaking. Charlotte lit the lamp and opened the journal with cautious hands, her breath catching. As she scanned the first pages, "This is Hathaway's handwriting," she confirmed. "I recognize it from documents my father kept." Her fingers traced the entries. "Elijah, these are dated just before the mine collapse. Listen to this. Wilkes lacks resolve, but necessity will strengthen his hand. The Lockwood situation requires permanent resolution." The storm intensified outside, rain lashing against the windows as they bent over the damning evidence. In the flickering lamplight, Charlotte's expression transformed from shock to grim satisfaction. "We have him," she whispered. "After 15 years, we finally have him." Founders' Day in Redemption Falls was the territory's most anticipated annual celebration. Franklin Hathaway had established the tradition shortly after the Lockwood tragedy, positioning himself as the town's true founder and benefactor. The irony was not lost on Charlotte as she prepared for the day that would either restore her legacy or destroy her chance for justice forever. "You understand the risk," Elijah said, watching her dress in the simple but elegant gown Mei Lin had provided. It was her mother's style, high-necked, with a modest bustle and deep blue fabric that matched her eyes. "Once you reveal yourself publicly, there's no going back." "I've lived in shadows for 15 years, Charlotte replied, securing a cameo at her throat. "I won't hide any longer." The town square had been transformed for the celebration. Bunting, draped the buildings, tables groaned with food, and a small platform had been erected for speeches. Hathaway would address the gathering as he did every year, retelling the sanitized history of the town's founding with himself as the visionary leader. Charlotte and Elijah arrived separately. He entered openly, drawing the expected attention, while she slipped in with a group of visitors from neighboring settlements. Hammond and Maylin were already positioned near the platform, the engineer carrying a weathered document tube containing the original town charter, their insurance policy if legal standing was questioned. The crowd swelled as midday approached. Sheriff Wade and his deputy circulated, maintaining order while keeping a watchful eye for any disruption. Victoria Hathaway stood beside her father on the platform, the perfect image of a devoted daughter in her cream silk dress and carefully arranged curls. Franklin Hathaway stepped forward to begin the ceremony, resplendent in a tailored suit, with his gold watch chain prominently displayed across his vest. At 55, he remained an imposing figure, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, with the confident bearing of a man who believed himself untouchable. "Friends and neighbors," his voice carried across the hushed crowd. 15 years ago, this valley held nothing but promise and raw potential. Through vision, determination, and the sweat of good men and women, we have built something remarkable. Charlotte moved steadily through the crowd as he spoke, working her way toward the platform. She felt stares following her progress. A stranger at their celebration, and a woman moving with unusual purpose. "We honor today the spirit of enterprise that built Redemption Falls," Hathaway continued. "From tragedy, we forged opportunity. From wilderness, civilization." She reached the front just as he paused to acknowledge applause. Their eyes met across the short distance, and for one frozen moment, recognition flickered in his gaze, followed immediately by disbelief and then something darker. "Excuse me, Mr. Hathaway," Charlotte called, her voice clear and carrying. "I believe you've omitted some critical details from your account." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sheriff Wade stepped forward, hand moving to his holster, but Hathaway raised a hand to stop him. "The young lady appears to have something to contribute," he said smoothly, "though I don't believe we've been introduced." "We have, actually." Charlotte climbed the steps to the platform, feeling hundreds of eyes upon her. "Many years ago, when I was a child, before you murdered my parents and stole my inheritance." The crowd's murmur became a gasp. Victoria's composed expression faltered. As Charlotte turned to face the gathered townspeople, "My name is Catherine Lockwood, daughter of James and Elizabeth Lockwood, the true founders of this town." Her voice remained steady despite her racing heart. 15 years ago, my family was believed killed in a mine collapse that was no accident, but a deliberate act of sabotage orchestrated by Franklin Hathaway. Sheriff Wade pushed forward. "That's enough of this nonsense. This woman is an imposter." "I am no imposter." Charlotte withdrew the silver locket from her bodice. "This was my mother's, given to me on my 10th birthday. Inside is a portrait of my father and a lock of my mother's hair." Hathaway's practiced calm was cracking. "This is preposterous. Catherine Lockwood died in the same tragic accident that claimed her parents." "Did I?" Charlotte challenged. "Or was I simply fortunate enough to arrive late that day, late enough to escape the explosion you had arranged?" From the crowd, Hammond stepped forward, the document tube in hand. "I was chief engineer of the Lockwood. And mine. The supports in that tunnel were new, inspected the week before. There was no structural reason for that collapse." Another voice joined in. Porter from the Mercantile. "The Lockwood family built this town. Some of us remember that, even if it's been scrubbed from recent histories." Charlotte withdrew Wilkes' letter from her reticule. "I have here a signed confession from your former partner, Martin Wilkes, detailing your plan to eliminate my family and seize control of their holdings." Hathaway's face darkened. "A convenient fiction from a man now conveniently dead and unable to defend himself against slander?" "Not just his word," Charlotte countered, We have recovered the ledgers documenting your purchase of explosives through military contractors rather than standard mining suppliers, explosives that far exceeded any legitimate mining operation's needs. The crowd had grown completely silent, hanging on every word of the unfolding drama. Victoria had stepped back from her father, her face pale as she watched the accusations mount. And most damning of all, Charlotte continued, we have your own journal, in your own hand, planning what you called the permanent resolution of the Lockwood situation. This final revelation struck home. Hathaway's gaze snapped to his daughter, understanding and fury dawning simultaneously in his expression. Victoria met his eyes without flinching, though her hands trembled visibly. "Sheriff!" Hathaway barked. "Arrest this woman immediately for slander and disruption of a public event." Wade moved forward, but now others in the crowd were calling out objections. Elijah stepped to Charlotte's side, his presence a silent declaration of support. "I'm not finished," Charlotte announced. "Before you attempt to silence me, there's one more piece of evidence the people of Redemption Falls should see." She gestured to Hammond, who unrolled the document he carried. "The original town charter," Charlotte explained, "signed by my father and 12 other founding families, many of whose descendants stand among you today. This charter explicitly states that, in the event of a founder's death, their rights and properties pass to their direct heirs. By law, your law, Mr. Hathaway, I am the rightful owner of the Lockwood holdings, which include half the land this town stands on." The declaration sent shockwaves through the gathering. Longtime residents conferred in hushed voices, many nodding, as they recalled the truth of her words. Hathaway's carefully constructed facade finally cracked completely. "This is absurd. You have no proof of your identity. You're nothing but an opportunistic fraud." "I think," came a new voice, quiet but firm, "that she has provided more than sufficient evidence." All eyes turned to Judge Hollister, who had risen from his seat near the platform. The elderly jurist had served the territory for over 20 years, his integrity unquestioned even by Hathaway. "As the ranking judicial authority present," the judge continued, "I believe these accusations warrant a formal investigation. Sheriff Wade, you will take custody of the evidence presented, not the person presenting it." Wade hesitated. Caught between his patron and the law he was sworn to uphold. In that moment of uncertainty, Hathaway made his fatal mistake. "This ends now," he snarled, drawing a concealed derringer from his vest pocket and aiming it directly at Charlotte's heart. Time seemed to freeze as Hathaway's derringer leveled at Charlotte. Several women screamed, men shouted warnings, but it was Victoria who moved fastest, lunging forward to grab her father's arm. "Father, no!" The weapon discharged, the bullet whistling, harmlessly over Charlotte's head as Elijah pulled her roughly aside. In the ensuing chaos, deputies and townspeople surged toward the platform. Judge Hollister bellowed for order while Sheriff Wade, finally choosing a side, seized Hathaway's weapon and restrained him. "This isn't over," Hathaway snarled as he was led away. "This changes nothing." But it had changed everything. The crowd's mood had shifted decisively. Whispers of support for the Lockwood girl spread like wildfire. The banker's attempted violence had done more to convince them of his guilt than any evidence could have. Victoria stood trembling on the platform, her complexion ashen. "Miss Lockwood," she managed, "I had no idea he would—" "I know," Charlotte assured her. "Thank you for what you did." The judge called for an emergency session of the territorial court to convene the following morning. Charlotte's evidence would be formally presented, and Hathaway would have his chance to respond to the charges. In the meantime, he would remain under guard at his own home rather than the small jail, a concession to his standing that few approved but none openly challenged. As the crowd dispersed, Hammond approached Charlotte and Elijah. "It's not safe for you to stay at the ranch tonight," the old engineer warned. "Hathaway still has men loyal to him. They won't let this stand without a fight." You can stay at my father's house, Mei Lin offered. Few would think to look for you in the Chinese Quarter. The plan was agreed upon. Charlotte would go with Mei Lin, while Elijah and Hammond secured the evidence in the judge's chambers. They would reconvene at first light for the hearing. Dusk was settling over Redemption Falls as Charlotte followed Mei Lin through narrow alleys behind the main street. The Chinese community occupied a small section at the town's edge. Modest homes, built with care but largely ignored by the white residents. "My father says your father was an honorable man," Mei Lin said as they walked. "He paid Chinese workers the same as white men. Many here still remember the Lockwood family with respect." Charlotte felt a bittersweet pride at these words. Another piece of her parents' legacy restored. "I hope to honor that memory," she replied. They had nearly reached May's home when a figure stepped from the shadows. Victoria Hathaway, her fine dress exchanged for a plain dark cloak. "Miss Lockwood," she said urgently, "I must speak with you." Mei Lin positioned herself protectively beside Charlotte. "How did you find us?" "I saw you heading this way." Victoria's voice was strained. "Please, it's about my father. He's the—" Words died as four men emerged from surrounding alleyways, revolvers drawn. Sheriff Wade stepped forward, his badge catching the last light of day. "Catherine Lockwood," he announced formally, "you're under arrest for fraud, theft of private documents, and conspiracy to defame a public figure." Charlotte's heart sank as she recognized the trap. Her gaze locked with Victoria's, understanding dawning too late. "You led them here." "I'm sorry," Victoria whispered, genuine anguish in her eyes. "He threatened to kill himself, said he'd rather die than face disgrace. I couldn't—" Her voice broke. "He's still my father." Wade's deputies moved in, roughly securing Charlotte's wrists with iron cuffs. Mei Lin protested, only to be shoved aside with a warning to stay out of white folks' business. "The evidence has already been delivered to Judge Hollister," Charlotte reminded Wade as they led her away. "This changes nothing." The sheriff's smile was cold. Judge Hollister was called away suddenly. "Family emergency in Denver. Terrible timing." "How convenient. Isn't it just?" Wade gestured for his men to proceed. "In his absence, legal matters fall to the mayor, who, as you know, serves at the pleasure of the town council. A council chaired by Franklin Hathaway." They didn't take her to the town jail, but instead to a small storeroom behind the sheriff's office, a space without windows, furnished only with a hard bench and secured by a heavy door. There Charlotte was left alone, the distant sounds of the town fading as night deepened. Hours later, the door opened to admit Victoria. She carried a small lamp and a bundle wrapped in cloth. "Food," she explained, setting it beside Charlotte. "And water. Come to ease your conscience." Charlotte didn't bother hiding her bitterness. Victoria flinched but held her ground. "I brought you something else as well." She withdrew a folded document from her sleeve. "This is a formal declaration, transferring ownership of the Lockwood mine and associated properties to Hathaway Bank and Trust, signed and dated today." "I'll never sign that." "You already have." Victoria's expression was pained, or rather, a reasonable facsimile of your signature appears on it. "Father had it prepared this afternoon." Charlotte stared in disbelief. "Forgery. Add that to his crimes." "It doesn't matter." Victoria sank onto the bench, suddenly looking exhausted. "By morning, the original documents you presented will have disappeared from the judge's chambers. Your friends, the Chinese girl and the ranch hand, will be dealt with, and you—" She hesitated. "Father says you'll be escorted to the Territorial Asylum in Denver. A tragic case of delusional identity, never to trouble Redemption Falls again. And you're allowing this to happen." Victoria met her gaze directly. "I didn't know what he planned. When he pulled that gun, I realized how far he would go, but he's still my father." Her voice dropped. "He raised me alone after Mother died. Everything I have, everything I am, comes from him." "Including your conscience?" Charlotte challenged. "Does that come from him too?" The question hung between them, unanswered. Meanwhile, Elijah returned to his ranch to collect supplies before joining Hammond at their designated meeting place. As he approached his cabin, instinct warned him something was wrong. The door stood, slightly ajar, though he'd secured it before leaving. Moving cautiously, rifle ready, he circled to the rear of the building. Boot prints marked the soft earth. Multiple men had surrounded his home. Elijah froze as a twig snapped behind him. He began to turn, but too late. Something hard struck the back of his head, and darkness claimed him. He awoke to find himself bound to a chair in his own cabin. Sheriff Wade stood before him, flanked by 2 deputies. "Mason," Wade greeted him, coldly. "Seems you've been keeping interesting company lately." "Where is she?" Elijah demanded, struggling against his bonds. "Miss Lockwood is enjoying Hathaway's hospitality." Wade inspected Elijah's rifle, which leaned against the wall. "Nice weapon. Shame about the accident you're about to have while cleaning it." Understanding dawned. People will ask questions. Maybe. For a day or two. Wade shrugged. Then life will go on, just as it has in Redemption Falls for 15 years, without Catherine Lockwood, and now without you. The night deepened over Redemption Falls as Hammond waited at the abandoned mill where he was supposed to meet Elijah. When 2 hours passed with no sign of the rancher, the old engineer knew something had gone wrong. Caution warned him to stay. Hidden, but loyalty pushed him into motion. He made his way carefully to Mei Lin's home, only to find her father alone and agitated. "They took her," the old man explained in halting English. "Sheriff men. My Mei Lin follow, not come back." Hammond's worry deepened. If both Charlotte and Elijah were missing, and now Mei Lin as well, Hathaway was eliminating witnesses and supporters with alarming efficiency. With few options remaining, Hammond sought out the one person in town who might still be able to help: Harold Porter. The mercantile owner had shown courage during the Founders' Day confrontation, publicly supporting Charlotte's claims. Porter answered Hammond's urgent knocking with a shotgun in hand. "Had a feeling trouble wasn't finished," he said, letting the engineer inside. "Heard rumors about Miss Lockwood being arrested, despite the evidence she presented." "It's worse than that," Hammond explained. "Mason's missing too, and the girl who was helping us." Porter's expression darkened. "Wade's been gathering his deputies all evening, calling it security measures, but it looks more like preparing for war. We need to find where they're holding them." "Charlotte's in the storeroom, behind the sheriff's office," came a voice from the shadows of Porter's back room. Mei Lin stepped forward, a bruise darkening her cheek. "I followed them there, but one of the deputies caught me watching. I managed to escape, but they'll be looking for me now." "What about Mason?" Hammond asked. "I overheard Wade saying something." "About taking care of the ranch problem tonight." Mei Lin's voice was grim. "They mean to kill him and make it look like an accident." Porter set his shotgun on the table. "We need more men, decent folk who won't stand for this kind of injustice, even from Hathaway." "There's no time," Hammond insisted. "Wade could be at Mason's ranch already." "Then we split up," Porter decided. "Hammond, take my wagon and my fastest horse. Get out to Mason's place. I know a couple of miners who'll go with you, good men who worked the Lockwood claim before the accident." "I'll help free Charlotte," Mei Lin volunteered. "The storeroom has a small window at the back. With the right distraction, I could reach it." Porter nodded. "I'll provide that distraction. The town's on edge after today's events. A fire in the empty building across from the sheriff's office should draw enough attention." As the others prepared to leave, Porter pulled Hammond aside. "The judge's chambers were broken into an hour ago. All the evidence Charlotte presented is gone." "Not all of it," Hammond replied, patting his coat pocket. "I kept copies of the most damning documents. Old habits from my engineering days, always keep a duplicate of important papers." At Mason's ranch, Wade and his deputies had spent hours creating their staged accident. Elijah, still bound to the chair, had been systematically beaten. His injuries, designed to match those of a man who had been thrown and dragged by a horse before accidentally discharging his own weapon. "Almost time," Wade announced, checking his pocket watch. Midnight, perfect timing for a tragic mishap. One deputy positioned Elijah's rifle, carefully angling it toward the chair. Another scattered belongings around the cabin, creating the appearance of a struggle. Wade himself drafted a brief note suggesting Elijah had been agitated about legal troubles stemming from his association with the Lockwood imposter. "You won't get away with this," Elijah said through swollen lips. "People know the truth now. People believe what's convenient," Wade replied, checking the rifle's load. "By this time tomorrow, Franklin Hathaway will be a sympathetic figure, a prominent citizen unfairly accused by a disturbed woman and her violent accomplice. And Charlotte will be on her way to Denver, heavily sedated. Dr. Sullivan's been well paid to diagnose her condition as acute delusional psychosis." Wade smiled coldly. "It's amazing how quickly order restores itself when the right pressure is applied." The sound of an approaching wagon interrupted Wade's gloating. He gestured for his men to douse the lamps. "Expecting company?" Elijah asked, a spark of hope kindling. "Despite his dire situation, just a complication to be dealt with," Wade muttered, drawing his revolver. The wagon stopped outside. A familiar voice called out, "Mason, you there?" "Hammond." Elijah opened his mouth to shout a warning, but a deputy's hand clamped roughly over it. Wade moved to the window, peering out cautiously. "Old fool came alone," he observed with satisfaction. "Fisher, deal with him. Make it quick and quiet." As the deputy slipped out the back door, Elijah struggled violently against his bonds, managing to tip his chair sideways with a loud crash. Wade cursed, striking him with the revolver butt. "Mason!" Hammond called again, closer now. "Something's wrong. Get ready," he added in a lower voice to someone unseen. The deputy who had exited the cabin suddenly cried out in surprise. A shotgun blast shattered the night, followed by the sounds of a scuffle. Wade rushed to the door, firing blindly into the darkness. The window behind Elijah exploded inward as a burly miner crashed through it, rolling to his feet with remarkable agility for his size. In the confusion, a second man burst through the front door, tackling Wade before he could fire again. "Cut him loose!" Hammond shouted from outside, where he was grappling with the remaining deputy. The miner sliced through Elijah's bonds with a hunting knife. "Can you stand?" Elijah nodded, though his legs threatened to buckle as circulation returned painfully. He seized his rifle from where it had been positioned for the staged accident. "Hammond," he called hoarsely, "we need to get to town. They've got Charlotte locked up." "Already being handled," Hammond assured him, appearing in the doorway. "But we need to hurry. Porter can only create so much distraction." Across town, flames illuminated the night sky as an abandoned warehouse near the sheriff's office burned fiercely. Most of the town had turned out to form a bucket brigade, including the deputies who had been guarding the storeroom where Charlotte was held. In the confusion, Mei Lin slipped through shadows to the rear of the building. The small window was barred, but set in aging wood that yielded to the pry bar she carried. Working quickly, she removed enough of the frame to pass a slender saw blade through to Charlotte. "Hurry," Mei Lin whispered, as Charlotte worked on the interior bolt. "The fire won't distract them forever." "Where's Elijah?" Charlotte asked, finally freeing the window. Hammond went to find him. "They'll meet us at the old church outside town." Charlotte squeezed through the narrow opening, tearing her dress but emerging free into the night air. Mei Lin led her through back alleys, away from the commotion, pausing only long enough to collect a bundle of supplies Porter had prepared. Food, a change of clothes, and most importantly, Hammond's copies of the evidence. As they reached the edge of town, a shout went up behind them. "The prisoners escaped. Check the storeroom." "Run!" Mei Lin urged, pulling Charlotte toward the shadows of the tree line. "Don't look back." The abandoned church stood silhouetted against the night sky, its steeple listing slightly after years of neglect. Built by early settlers before Redemption Falls had properly formed, it had been forgotten when the town grew in a different direction than originally planned. Now it served as sanctuary for those the town had rejected once again. Charlotte paced the weathered floorboards, pausing occasionally to peer through broken windows for any sign of Elijah and Hammond. Mei Lin had gone to scout the road, concerned that the sheriff's men might have picked up their trail. When the church door finally creaked open, Charlotte whirled, a piece of broken pew raised defensively. Her arm dropped at the sight of Elijah, his face bruised and swollen, but his eyes alert and searching for her. "You're alive," she breathed, closing the distance between them. "Takes more than Wade and his thugs to finish me," he replied, wincing, as she touched his face gently, though they gave it a fair try. Hammond entered behind him, followed by Porter and two miners Charlotte didn't recognize. "The town's in an uproar," the mercantile owner reported. "Wade's deputized another dozen men. They're searching everywhere." "They won't think to look here for a while," Hammond assured them. "This place has been abandoned so long, most folks forget it exists." By lamplight, they assessed their situation, with the original evidence stolen from the judge's chambers and Hathaway preparing forged documents to solidify his claim. Their position was precarious. Hammond's copies would help, but without Judge Hollister to authenticate them, they might not be enough. "We need the original will," Charlotte said finally. "My father's actual will, not the falsified version Hathaway filed after the collapse." "Wilkes mentioned it in his letter," Elijah recalled. "Said Hathaway keeps it in his home safe. Along with his journal," Charlotte added. "But the combination Wilkes provided is useless now. Victoria said her father changed it after discovering she'd been in his papers." A soft knock at the door silenced them. Elijah moved protectively in front of Charlotte, rifle ready, while one of the miners extinguished the lamp. The knock came again, followed by Mei Lin's voice giving their agreed signal. The door opened, to reveal not only Mei Lin, but another figure behind her, Victoria Hathaway, her face pale but determined. "What is she doing here?" Charlotte demanded as Elijah raised his rifle warily. "She found me watching the road," Mei Lin explained. "Says she wants to help." "Help?" Elijah's voice was dangerously quiet. "Like she helped lead the sheriff to Charlotte. Earlier?" Victoria stepped forward, her hands visibly trembling, though her voice remained steady. "I deserve your distrust. What I did was unforgivable. Yet here you are, asking forgiveness," Charlotte observed. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm offering atonement." Victoria withdrew a folded document from her cloak. "This is my father's new will, the one he's having you declared dead to fully implement. It names me as his sole heir to all properties, including the Lockwood holdings." She placed it on a broken pew, then added a small key beside it. "This opens his private study. Inside, behind the portrait of my grandfather, is his new safe." She hesitated. "The combination is 10-438. My birthday." Charlotte studied her suspiciously. "Why are you doing this now?" "Because I saw his face when he pointed that gun at you." Victoria's composure cracked slightly. "I've spent years convincing myself that my father was a good man who sometimes made difficult decisions. But there's a difference between difficult and monstrous. This could be another trap," Hammond warned. "It's not." Victoria turned to face him. "You worked the Lockwood mine for 20 years, Mr. Hammond. You know what was stolen that day. Not just lives, but legacy. A town that might have been built on fairness instead of fear." She looked back to Charlotte. "I can't change what my father did, but I can help restore what was taken." The silence stretched as they weighed her words against her earlier betrayal. Finally, Elijah lowered his rifle slightly. "How do we get into the house? It'll be guarded." "The servant's entrance at the rear kitchen garden is watched by only one man," Victoria explained. "Tom Fincher. He drinks on duty. He'll be half asleep by now." "And your father?" "Meeting with his lawyers and the town council. They're drafting emergency measures to restore order following today's unfortunate disruption." Her mouth twisted bitterly. "He won't return home until well after midnight." Charlotte made her decision. "I'll go." "Not alone," Elijah said immediately. "I need to do this," she insisted. It has to be me who finds my father's will. Then I'm coming with you." His tone brooked no argument. "Hammond and the others can secure our escape route." Porter cleared his throat. "There's a stage leaving for Denver at dawn. Driver's my cousin. He'll hold it for you if necessary, no questions asked." Plans formed quickly after that. Victoria would return home, as if nothing had changed, ensuring the rear entrance remained accessible. Charlotte and Elijah would follow 30 minutes later. Hammond and the miners would create a diversion near the sheriff's office if needed, drawing attention away from the Hathaway mansion. As they prepared to separate, Victoria hesitated at the door. "There's something else you should know." In his study, there's a letter my father wrote to Martin Wilkes just before their partnership dissolved. "I found it when I was searching for evidence." Her voice lowered. "It details how they disposed of the bodies, your parents' bodies. They weren't left in the mine." Charlotte went very still. "Where are they?" "Buried on the south ridge of your family's property, beneath 3 pine trees that grow together." Victoria's eyes held genuine sorrow. "My father didn't want them found during any later mining operations that might reveal the sabotage." This unexpected revelation hit Charlotte like a physical blow. For 15 years, she had imagined her parents' final resting place in the darkness of the collapsed mine. Now, knowing they lay beneath open sky on Lockwood land, her land, brought both pain and a strange sense of completion. "Thank you," she said finally, "for this, if nothing else." As Victoria slipped away into the darkness, Charlotte felt Elijah's hand come to rest gently on her shoulder. "We'll find them," he promised. "After this is finished." She covered his hand with her own, drawing strength from his presence. "First, we reclaim what was stolen. Then we honor what was lost." Hammond checked his pocket watch in the dim light. "Half hour before you move. Better get ready." Charlotte nodded, her resolve hardening. This night would end either with justice finally served or with everything lost forever. There would be no middle ground, no compromise, no tomorrow to try. Again, 15 years of waiting had come down to these final hours. The Hathaway mansion loomed against the night sky, its windows glowing with lamplight. From their position in the shadows of the kitchen garden, Charlotte and Elijah observed the lone guard Victoria had mentioned. As predicted, Tom Fincher was, slumped in his chair, a bottle dangling from his fingertips. "Ready?" Elijah whispered, his hand resting lightly on his holstered revolver. Charlotte nodded, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might be heard. They moved silently across the garden, years of ranch work having taught Elijah to step without sound, while Charlotte's childhood lessons in deportment had unintentionally prepared her for such stealth. The kitchen door opened with a faint creak. They froze, but Fincher merely shifted in his drunken doze. Inside, the house was quiet, most servants having retired to their quarters. Victoria had left a small lamp burning in the hallway as promised, providing just enough light to navigate. "This way," Charlotte murmured, recalling the house layout Victoria had sketched for them. "The study is on the 2nd floor." They ascended the grand staircase, every creaking board threatening to announce their presence. At the top, they turned, left down a carpeted hallway lined with paintings, landscapes of Redemption Falls and its surroundings, depicting the town's growth under Hathaway's influence. Charlotte noted with bitter irony that several showed the Lockwood mine in its heyday, with no acknowledgement of its original owners. The study door was unlocked, just as Victoria had said it would be. Inside, leather-bound books lined the walls, and a massive desk dominated the center of the room. Behind it hung the portrait Victoria had described. Franklin Hathaway's father, stern-faced and imposing. Elijah secured the door while Charlotte moved directly to the painting, lifting it carefully from its hooks. Behind it, as promised, was a wall safe, newer and more substantial than the one Wilkes had described in his letter. 10-438, Charlotte whispered, turning the dial with trembling fingers. The mechanism clicked, and the safe door swung open. Inside lay several document folders, a cash box, and a leather-bound journal similar to the one Victoria had provided earlier. Charlotte reached for a folder labeled Lockwood Properties and opened it with reverent care. "My father's will," she confirmed, scanning the contents. "The real one. It leaves everything to me as his sole heir, with my mother as executor or, in the event of her death, his attorney James Collins." Collins left town right after the accident, Elijah recalled from their earlier discussions with Hammond. Forced out by Hathaway, no doubt. Charlotte tucked the will into her coat. "We need the journal too, and wait." Her fingers found another document, this one a letter addressed to Martin Wilkes, just as Victoria had mentioned. The letter confirmed Victoria's revelation about her parents' burial site, but contained an additional detail that made Charlotte's blood run cold. "Elijah," she whispered, "listen to this. Rest assured that should Catherine's body ever be discovered, it will be attributed to the unfortunate incident with the Blackfoot. The girl's remains would be unrecognizable after all this time, in any case." "What Blackfoot incident?" "There wasn't one," Charlotte realized. "He was planning to kill me if I was ever found and blame it on an Indian attack." She folded the letter carefully. Another fabrication to add to his crimes. With the evidence secured, they retraced their steps toward the kitchen. As they reached the main floor, voices from the front of the house froze them in place. The main door opened, admitting Franklin Hathaway himself, accompanied by Sheriff Wade. "Want men at every road out of town," Hathaway was saying. "She won't get far, not with her face now known to everyone." "We've already got the stage depot watched," Wade assured him, "and telegrams sent to neighboring settlements." Charlotte and Elijah pressed themselves into an alcove beneath the stairs as the men moved toward the study. Once their footsteps receded, upstairs, the pair slipped toward the kitchen door. They were halfway across the garden when Fincher stirred, his bleary eyes focusing on the moving figures. "Hey, stop right there!" Elijah shoved Charlotte forward. "Run! I'll handle him!" A brief scuffle ensued as Charlotte fled toward their arranged meeting point. Behind her, she heard a muffled grunt, then Elijah's footsteps following. Shouts erupted. From the house, the alarm had been raised. Dawn was breaking as they reached the town hall, where Hammond and Porter waited with the others. Judge Hollister had returned unexpectedly in the night, his family emergency having been a ruse orchestrated by Hathaway to remove him temporarily. "We have the will," Charlotte announced breathlessly, "and Hathaway's journal and letters to Wilkes." The judge examined the documents with professional scrutiny. "These appear genuine," he confirmed, "enough to convene an emergency hearing at the very least." "Hathaway and Wade are right behind us," Elijah warned. "They know we took the documents." As if summoned by his words, commotion erupted outside. Sheriff Wade's voice carried clearly, "Surround the building. They're inside with the judge." Porter barred the main doors, while Hammond led them to a side entrance. "The town council meets in 1 hour," the judge informed them. "Every influential citizen will be present. The perfect forum to present this evidence. If we can reach it alive," Elijah muttered. The council chamber was already filling when they entered through a service corridor. Men in suits and women in their finest attire gathered for what they believed would be a session to address the Lockwood imposter situation. Their shocked faces, as Judge Hollister escorted Charlotte to the front of the room, would have been comical under different circumstances. "Ladies and gentlemen," the judge announced, his authoritative voice cutting through the growing murmurs, "the council will come to order for an emergency hearing into the matter of the Lockwood inheritance and associated criminal allegations." The double doors at the rear burst open, admitting Franklin Hathaway with Sheriff Wade and several deputies. Hathaway's confident stride faltered as he saw Charlotte standing beside the judge, the documents spread before them. "This is irregular, Your Honor," Hathaway blustered. "This woman is wanted for theft and fraud. The only fraud apparent to this court," Judge Hollister interrupted, "is the one perpetrated against the Lockwood estate 15 years ago." He held up the original will. This document, bearing notarized witness signatures and proper legal seals, names Catherine Lockwood as the sole heir to her father's considerable holdings. Hathaway's face darkened. That document is a forgery. On the contrary, the judge continued, expert analysis confirms it as genuine. What's more, we have evidence suggesting the will you filed after the accident was the actual forgery. He gestured to Charlotte. Miss Lockwood has additional evidence to present. Charlotte stepped forward, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I have here letters written by Franklin Hathaway to his former partner, Martin Wilkes, detailing their plan to eliminate my family and seize control of our properties. I have ledgers documenting the purchase of explosives used to cause the mine collapse. And I have Hathaway's own journal, in which he records his actions and motivations in explicit detail. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several council members leaned forward, their expressions shifting from skepticism to growing concern. This is absurd, Hathaway snarled, moving toward Charlotte. These documents were stolen from my private safe by your own daughter. Victoria's voice rang out as she entered from a side door. I provided Miss Lockwood with the combination. Father, I helped her find the evidence you've hidden for 15 years. The betrayal stopped Hathaway cold. Victoria, I've spent my life believing you were a great man who built something from nothing, she continued, her voice breaking slightly. But you built it all on murder and theft. The Lockwoods weren't obstacles to progress. They were its true architects. Sheriff Wade, sensing the turning tide, moved toward the exit only to find his path blocked by Hammond and several miners. One by one, his deputies stepped away from him, unwilling to stand with a man whose corruption now lay exposed. Judge Hollister's gavel struck with finality. Franklin Hathaway, you are hereby charged with the murders of James and Elizabeth Lockwood, the attempted murder of Catherine Lockwood, fraud, theft, and conspiracy. As Hathaway lunged toward Charlotte in a final desperate act, Elijah stepped between them. The banker's face contorted with rage, then crumpled in defeat as he realized the empire he'd built on deception was collapsing around him. Take him into custody, the judge ordered. Sheriff Wade as well, as the former pillars of redemption. Foles were led away. Charlotte stood at the center of the council chamber, the weight of 15 years lifting from her shoulders. Justice, so long denied, had finally been served. Autumn painted the Wyoming landscape in russet and gold as Charlotte stood on the south ridge of what was once again Lockwood land. 3 pine trees, grown together just as Victoria had described, cast long shadows in the late afternoon light. A simple granite marker now stood at their base, engraved with the names of James and Elizabeth Lockwood and the words, founders, visionaries, beloved parents. 6 months had passed since justice had finally been served in Redemption Falls. Franklin Hathaway awaited trial in the territorial prison, his empire dismantled piece by piece as the full extent of his crimes came to light. Sheriff Wade had turned state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence, his testimony further damning his former patron. The town itself was undergoing a transformation. With the Lockwood properties restored to their rightful heir, Charlotte had implemented changes her father would have approved, reopening the mine with proper safety measures and fair wages, establishing a school fund for all children in the territory, including the Chinese and Native American communities, and revising the town charter to prevent any single individual from amassing the kind of unchecked power Hathaway had wielded. Thought I'd find you here. Elijah's voice came from behind her. Charlotte turned, a smile warming her features at the sight of him. The past months had softened the hard edges of the solitary rancher she'd first encountered. He still preferred the quiet of open spaces to the bustle of town, but he no longer shied away from human connection. Just paying my respects, she explained as he joined her by the marker. Sometimes I still can't believe they're really here, that I can visit them whenever I want. Your father would be proud of what you've accomplished, Elijah said, his hand finding hers naturally. Charlotte squeezed his fingers, drawing strength from the contact. There's still so much to do. The new processing facility needs oversight, and the town council wants to discuss expanding the railroad spur. And the ranch? Elijah asked, a hint of concern in his voice. The question touched on a tension that had been growing between them. With her fortune and position restored, Charlotte had relocated to the Lockwood mansion in town, assuming the responsibilities her birthright entailed. Elijah had remained at his ranch, helping when needed but maintaining his independence. "I miss it," she admitted softly. "The quiet mornings, the simplicity. It's still there," he reminded her. "Whenever you need it." Charlotte turned to face him fully. "What I need, Elijah Mason, is not to choose between worlds. I need both. The legacy my parents left me and the future we might build together." A smile tugged at his lips. "Are you proposing an arrangement, Miss Lockwood?" "I'm proposing a partnership." Her blue eyes held his steadily. "One that honors both our pasts while creating something new." From her pocket, she withdrew a document and handed it to him. Elijah unfolded it with curiosity that turned to surprise as he read. "Deed of expansion for the Mason Ranch," he murmured. "Charlotte, what is this?" "The Lockwood holdings include more land than I could ever manage personally," she explained. "That parcel adjoins your property. The water rights alone would triple your capacity. Combined with your expertise, it could become one of the most productive ranches in the territory." Elijah studied the document, conflict evident in his expression. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," Charlotte insisted. "It's an investment in our future. I need someone I trust to develop that land properly, someone who understands both ranching and mining concerns as the territory grows." His expression softened. "And this partner of yours, would he be expected to attend fancy town functions and council meetings?" "Only the important ones," she promised with a smile. "And in exchange, his partner might occasionally escape to the ranch when town life becomes overwhelming." Elijah carefully refolded the deed, his weathered hands handling the paper with reverence. "Seems like a fair arrangement." "There is one condition," Charlotte added, her tone growing serious. "And the ranch house would need expansion, perhaps a larger porch where two people might sit and watch the sunset." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Are you saying that I love you, Elijah Mason?" Charlotte's directness, so characteristic of her, left no room for misinterpretation. "Yes, I believe I am." For a man of few words, his response required none. He drew her into his arms, his kiss conveying what language could not, that the lonely paths they had both walked had converged in a way neither could have imagined that dust-swept day when he'd found her collapsed at his gate. When they finally parted, Charlotte rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "My mother once told me that true wealth isn't measured in silver or land, but in finding where you truly belong. And have you found where you belong?" She looked up at him, then out across the landscape that had nearly been stolen from her, the town in the distance, the ranch beyond the ridge, and here, the final resting place of those who had given her life and legacy. "I have," Charlotte affirmed. "It's not a place, though. It's a purpose, a chance to build something that matters with someone who matters." As the setting sun bathed the three pines in golden light, Charlotte and Elijah lingered by the marker. A moment longer, paying silent respect to the past before turning toward their future. Hand in hand, they made their way down the ridge toward the waiting horses. One path now, where there had once been two, just as it was meant to be. Behind them, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying the echo of justice served and promises kept, of a legacy reclaimed, and a new chapter beginning in the story of Redemption Falls.